Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. This is the 1 hour chart of silver provided by netdania.com. You can click on the link below. You can see that we have kind of this fanning out series of support lines. The highest one meets here and here, breaks down there. The second one meets here and here and breaks down here. And the third one is right here. So we're kind of rolling over, but we're also staying fairly steady because this area in here is fairly strong. So it still remains to be seen whether we will just work over this overbought condition. You can see the MACD is going lower and lower and lower. We're looking for a turn up at some point in the MACD as we work over this, work off this overbought condition. So we want to jump over to gold and do the same sort of analysis on gold. You can see it's a very similar chart. It's a little bit stronger than silver, but we have broken down, and then we want to pull our next set here. So question is going to be, are we going to break down through this line, and then where are we going to find support if we do? If we back out a little bit, we can probably find a little bit better support. So somewhere in here, maybe one of the old highs. It's hard to say. One of the bottoms may be in here, so it's hard to say. We'll draw a line from here, and then we'll also draw a line from just below there at the last support line right down here. So we may be getting down to these prices, but the MACD is working the overbought condition off. We're nowhere down near to these sell-off lows. You can see we've got these sell-off lows, and then the MACD on gold is also still falling, and hopefully will turn up, but could possibly take a turn down and go down and test some of those. So we just have to wait and see what happens with the chart. I want to take you over to the main story of the day. It's a very difficult story, so it started off very easy and then became very difficult. So I want to start off with the unveiling of the budget plan. So today Obama unveiled the $3.8 trillion budget plan, and it's fairly easy to get the numbers, at least the projected numbers. So we're looking at 3.8 trillion in spending, and the projection is that the deficit will be 1.3 trillion. So obviously one could garner from that they're projecting a $2.5 trillion revenue amount, because 2.5 and 1.3 is going to be 3.8. So they're planning on spending 3.8 trillion, and they're projecting revenues of 2.5 trillion, and they're looking at a deficit of 1.3 trillion. So what I wanted to examine, and I thought when I began this task that it would be a fairly simple task. As it turns out, it is one of the most complicated things I've ever undertaken. And that is because the numbers from the government as far as revenues and spending have got to be the most convoluted thing I've ever seen in my life. These people are, I will safely say after examining this, these people in the government who are in charge of these budgetary numbers are psychopaths, and they are pathological liars. That's the only way I can describe what I've encountered by trying to document this. So let me give you a summary of what I was trying to do. Really a simple spreadsheet. This is garnered from Wikipedia. It's not complex at all. The idea is to just do a sort of a balance sheet and go year by year by year, because what I'm trying to account for is how we get at this enormous number of $3.8 trillion. Why has this number grown so large? So I've gone to Wikipedia and I've assembled the receipts. You can see that's the top row, and the spending. So you'd think that's pretty simple. And for the first year and then the next couple of years, it was pretty simple. You had these line item spending amounts, these line item receipt amounts, tax revenues, different revenues, and then you get the total revenue amount, and then you've got your spending amounts, and you get the total spending amount. So you would think that would be pretty simple. My goal in doing this was to see how we got from, you can see $2.8 trillion in total spending in 2007 to the $3.8 trillion in total spending that we're at for 2012, which is just 5 years later. $1 trillion added to this total spending. So how did that come about? Well, it's not nearly as easy as you would think. But let's take you over to Wikipedia, and we'll start with the first one that I started out with. And this is pretty straightforward. This is 2007 United States federal budget, and you've got your total receipts, and that's going to be a total of income tax, Social Security tax, corporate tax, excise tax, custom duties, gift taxes, and other. And that's going to total $2.4 trillion. Then you've got your total spending, and it's broken down in all these categories, and the actual budget was $2.8 trillion. Now you have to keep in mind what the actual budget was as opposed to what they spent, and that can be a little bit tricky. But this first year is fairly straightforward. We've got 2.4 and 2.8. So we went ahead and copied that onto the spreadsheet, 2.4 and 2.8, and we want to go to the next year and look and see what's changed. Now they actually gave you percentages. They don't do that every year, and that's one of the tricky things they do. They don't give you every year the percentage changes, but you can see in this first year we've got a 28% increase in community development, 11% increase in general government, 8% increase in transportation, 13% interest on the debt. So we want to go to the next year. It's real simple. You just type in the next year, and Wikipedia will take you to it. And you can see our next year, you've got estimated receipts of $2.66 trillion. Now, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, why do we have estimated receipts? You can see over here we have total revenue, and that's going to differ from the estimated figure. And now you've got a breakdown that changes from the year before that. You've got it broken down into mandatory spending and discretionary spending. And you want to note here that the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War are not included in the regular budget. Instead, they are funded through special appropriations. So that's a very fishy thing right there. But we've got our receipts of about 2.7 trillion. We've got our expenditures of about 2.9 or so. So we get that in our spreadsheet, and that gives us a way to check the increase. So as you know, the next year of 2009 became one of the blowout years. This is the first year of Obama, so we want to check that year. And we find in 2009 our budget estimated receipts for fiscal year 2009 are 2.7 trillion. And the president's budget was for 3.1 trillion. So you're looking at roughly a $400 billion deficit there, until we get down to this line here. With projected receipts less than projected outlays, the budget proposed by President Bush predicts a net deficit of $400 billion, adding to the United States government debt of $11.4 trillion. Actual tax receipts total $2.1 trillion, significantly less than the $2.7 trillion expected. The actual deficit in 2009 was 1.4 trillion. So our number here, this 2.7 trillion, is actually 2.1 trillion. And you can see when we put that there that tax revenues are not increasing. They're just staying the same, but spending is going up. Now, I wanted to do a line item comparison of how spending goes up, but you can see you have the same number of columns, but they don't match up. So you're going to have to do a little bit of work to match them up. These first mandatory ones do, but on this one you have the Department of Defense. The next line is the Global War on Terror, which is kind of interesting because it's up 45.8%. Spending on the Global War on Terror is up almost 50%, but if you look back to the 2007 budget, you don't see a line item called Global War on Terror. Now you have a line item called Department of Defense, and that is also on this line, Defense. So he spent $548 billion on defense, and then we spent $481 billion on defense. But then we have this separate line item right beneath it, the Global War on Terror. When you add those two together, you've got about roughly $630 billion, which is a fairly large increase on this number here. So they're already playing games here. You'll notice you have the Department of Homeland Security. I don't see that there. I know it existed since 2001, but it's not in the year before. So they're beginning to play the games, and it becomes very hard to track. You'll note that we're really not increasing in tax revenues, but we're increasing in spending. So let's jump to the next year, 2010, and I think we're starting to get into years where we just simply don't have a budget. So when we get to the 2010 United States federal budget, you can see we've got total spending listed, but we don't have total revenues listed at all. If you look over here, total revenue is said to be 2.381 trillion requested, 2.165 trillion enacted. So what was the total revenue? I don't know. You tell me. They say the deficit was 1.171 trillion. So we're going to have to try to figure out where they got that figure. So again, the revenues for 2010 are not increasing. So we had a peak at the very beginning of the financial crisis, and then a crash and a continuing crash. We want to look at 2011 for the revenues that they're projecting, or they say they had. It's pretty strange that they don't have these numbers that are from years ago, but they just don't seem to have these numbers. So the 2012. The 2011 budget is telling us, and we don't have any breakdowns at all, is telling us the total revenue is 2.56, but it's really enacted at 2.3. I don't know what that means. Total expenditure 3.8, and so you can see you're looking at a deficit of roughly, say, 1.5 trillion, 1.56 trillion. That's what they're saying the requested deficit is. So as you can see, as you begin to break these numbers down, it becomes very difficult to see anything. The only thing you can conclude is that they're spending money hand over fist, but they're not taking in any more money. The $2.3 trillion 2011, we get a boost here under this new Obama budget. He tells us that he's going to spend $3.8 trillion, which means spending goes up, up, and up, and he expects the tax revenues to go up, but we can see that the tax revenues have never gone up. Their peak was actually back in 2008. They projected 2009 at 2.7, but it wasn't at all what they projected, and we've pretty much been flatlined around 2.2, 2.3 trillion. So if we get that figure, my guess is we'll probably get 2.2, 2.3 trillion again. We will spend 3.8 or even more, and that's not including the off-budget items. So we're probably going to be looking at another, say, 1.5 or 1.6 trillion dollar deficit. So just to put that in perspective, you're talking about having a household budget where you make roughly $50,000 a year and you spend $75,000 a year every year, year after year. Obviously, anybody seeing that would know that this person is in dire straits and they are headed for certain bankruptcy. So I thought this project would be very simple to do, but it's actually extremely complex because, as I said before, these people are psychopaths and they are pathological liars. They couldn't tell the truth if it were easier. They just simply lie without any recourse. There's no way to calculate the numbers that they're putting out. I'd love to be able to do a line item test to see what line items are increasing, how we went from a $2.8 trillion budget in 2007 to a $3.8 trillion budget without tax revenues increasing at all. But it's simply impossible because they obscure their spending. There's simply no way to tell. So obviously silver is going to be an investment you're going to be looking at. Gold as well, because they're about as trustworthy as the government of Greece. They just simply can't be trusted. There's not a word you can believe, and they're going to spend until they're just going to print money until there's no tomorrow. They're going to run this thing off the tracks. They have absolutely no intention of cutting whatsoever, and that's going to be hyperinflation. And we'll talk to you next time.